Jesus wasn't talking about physical, bodily resurrection. He was talking about spiritual reawakening. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Christianity wasn't true. Maybe it was just a cosmic myth. Symbolism was the best and most accurate way of interpreting and understanding the biblical stories, but never in the literal and metaphysically satisfying way that I believed it to be and that I wanted it to be. When I was in high school, I came across this way of interpreting the Bible symbolically. This was totally new to me, and I had never heard any preacher talk about the Bible and the biblical stories in this way before. It really helped me see a deeper level of meaning in the text, and this was really compelling. It was certain thinkers like Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pageau, and Joseph Campbell that influenced me and exposed me to this kind of interpretation. But it wasn't long until this kind of symbolic, allegorical interpretation of the biblical scriptures, and by virtue the Christian story, began to worry me that what I had believed about the Christian story wasn't actually true. That I was mistaken when I thought there was this real, concrete, personal, and good God that created the universe and everything in it, including humans, which were the crown of his creation, and that this God has been trying to redeem this creation back to himself ever since humans turned against him. I questioned the realness of this story, not its believability per se, but its realness. Was it actually true? Does it reflect the way the world really is? Was it real? Okay, there are two different ways in which I'm trying to use these words, true and real. Let me explain. One way, call it literal truth, and the other way, call it metaphorical truth. Now, I don't have neat definitions for these things, but it should suffice to say that a literal truth is, well, literally true. What you hear is what's reflected in reality. There is a one-to-one relationship between the meaning of the sentence and the words in the sentence and what is actually out there in the universe. For example, when I say my shoe squeaked on the floor, what I mean is, well, there is this actual object, a shoe, that at one point in the past rubbed against the floor and made this audible sound that I could hear with my ear, which is called a squeak. Or the sentence, J.K. Rowling is an author, would mean that there is this person out there in the world called J.K. Rowling who is this thing that is an author, someone who writes books and stories and writes for a living. These have a one-to-one relationship between the meaning of the words in the sentence and what's out there in reality. On the other hand, metaphorical or symbolic truths are derivatively true. What you hear isn't exactly what you get in reality. For example, sentences like, this exam is weighing on me, or that news would kill me. Things like metaphor, hyperbole, and other literary devices are of this latter kind. They're not exactly true. They don't have a one-to-one relationship with what's out there in reality, but they're still true in a derivative kind of way. That's why one author said, and I quote, "There are many people who misunderstand what fiction is. They'll say, fiction is a bunch of lies. I would say, fiction is one of the best ways for finding truth." Amy Tan is talking about metaphorical truth here. And not to say that this kind of truth is any less true. Amy Tan really believes that literature can teach real truths that reflect the way the world is. The only difference is that they're packaged differently. They're abstracting and generalizing truths from concrete instances and events and articulating them not in a one-to-one type way, but a derivatively true type of sense. Okay, now that I've said that, let's get back to the video. So was the Christian story literally true or only metaphorically and symbolically true? I began to question whether I would be physically resurrected from the dead one day and whether I would be physically in this place called the Kingdom of Heaven, or whether I might really see these people again who I once lived with but passed on during my lifetime. Or maybe heaven was just a state of mind, like one rapper once said. Or it's similar to this concept of nirvana, like in the Buddhist and Hindu traditions. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Christianity wasn't true. Maybe it was just a cosmic myth. And maybe it was just one of many equally plausible myths that were created by humans throughout the centuries. Why did I think that? Well, I began to see many similarities between the Christian tradition and other religions and stories and films. Ancient and modern stories from the Epic of Gilgamesh to Star Wars. Parallels with messianic type figures like Paul Atreides, Anakin Skywalker, and Harry Potter, who all attempted to destroy evil and establish peace in their respective worlds. Virgin births in Hinduism and Star Wars. Traitor type figures like Judas or Peter Pettigrew. Or even the idea of how people lose their humanity in pursuit of godlike power. Anakin and Tom Riddle respectively become Darth Vader and Lord Voldemort, these quasi-transhuman type figures in their pursuit of eternal life and godlike power. One part machine and the other part snake. Maybe, like Joseph Campbell would say, these were all instances of the primary and fundamental metaphor that governs all of human experience on this floating rock in the middle of the universe. So maybe Christianity isn't literally true. Maybe it's like these other fictional stories, just metaphorically true. Maybe it's just true as it relates to its themes, characters, lessons, plot lines, and so forth. Maybe this concept of resurrection was related to this idea of return and renewal, like in the arc of the hero's journey. Kind of like the change and development any person goes through when they face adversity in life. Like how people speak of reinventing themselves. So Jesus wasn't talking about physical, bodily resurrection. He was talking about spiritual resurrection. Yes, that's probably what he was talking about. Like a spiritual reawakening, kind of like nirvana. So I concluded that if my doubts were correct, and if symbolism was the best and most accurate way of interpreting and understanding the biblical stories, then at best, Christianity was still true, but only in this metaphorical and derivative type of way. No real concrete God, no bodily resurrection, and no actual heaven. But maybe eternal peace in this lifetime in a nirvana type of way. And again, at best, maybe Christianity was, amongst all these other stories, the most accurate and complete depiction of this cosmic metaphor. But never in the literal and metaphysically satisfying way that I believed it to be and that I wanted it to be. But why should I assume my doubts were correct? What were some reasons to think that Christianity was true in the way I had believed it to be? After all, Christianity has survived as a religion and faith for nearly the last 2,000 years. Click the link to watch part 2 of this video where I get into 3 reasons that changed my thinking about my doubts and assured me of the preeminence, the superiority of the Christian story amongst all these others. I'll see you there.